From the heartland of America on the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie, and welcome to Coast AM. Next hour, Michael Tellinger joins us as we talk about ancient mysteries right here on Coast AM. But here's what's happening. Well, a newly discovered asteroid zipped close by Earth a few hours ago. It posed no threat of crashing into our planet, even though it passed within the orbit of the moon. The asteroid, called 2010 GA6, is a relatively small space rock. They say it was about 71 feet wide, and it was discovered by astronomers with the Catalina Sky Survey in Tucson, Arizona. Not to worry, it's already gone past us. The thing you should worry about, though, is we don't know about these until it's almost too late. Our feature story at coasttocoastam.com, India's Chandrayaan-1 mission to the moon has identified tunnels below the surface of the moon, according to a top scientist, and he has maintained that human habitation could possibly be in those tubes in the future. The tubes were formed after the flow of lava from volcanoes. President Barack Obama and Russian President Dmitry Medvedev signed the biggest nuclear arms pact in a generation and envisioned a day when they can compromise on the divisive issue of missile defense. The new treaty, the first of its kind in 2 decades and nearly a year in the making, signaled a bold new opening in relations between the former Cold War foes. The pact will apparently shrink the limit of nuke warheads to 1,550 per country over 7 years. Now, that still allows for mutual destruction several times over. Arizona now has declared that guns made and kept inside its borders essentially are free from federal application, registration, and ownership regulations, and a surging movement among states that one supporter describes as a direct challenge to a government monopoly on the supply of firearms. Let's go now to John Lott, noted author and expert on guns, more guns, less crime. John, this is state number 6. It's going to grow, isn't it?
It's surely a positive news. It shows that these states are not just willing to go on the record, but they're going to face real legal costs and going and battling the federal government over this. And so, they're putting their money where their mouth is.
John, what's the big issue here? Why are these states, 6 of them so far, why are they doing this? Why are they trying to, within their borders, be free from federal application, registration, and ownership regulations? All of a sudden, why? What's happening?
Right. Well, it's unfortunately something that they really shouldn't have to do. I think any clear reading of the Constitution would indicate that the federal government's gone much farther than the framers would have even possibly imagined with regard to the Commerce Clause. That originally was just to make it so that individual states couldn't block trade with other states to protect their own domestic industries. And it's turned into something that the federal government says when anything affects interstate trade, the federal government can regulate it. And they've used that not only to regulate things like wheat production, but also guns, because they say that, if you go and sell guns in your state, even if they just stay in your state, it affects the nationwide price of guns, and therefore we can regulate it. And many states feel that the federal government has put regulations in that actually harm the interests of their citizens, make it costly and difficult for citizens to get guns to defend themselves, for example, and had perverse impacts on crime rates.
And the feds, why don't they want the states to do this?
Well, because they don't like giving up their power, and they like to believe that, these gun laws that we have, despite evidence to the contrary, they like to believe that they're doing good things, I guess, and they're willing, because the ends justify the means in the sense that they've convinced themselves that since they think they're doing good things, it's okay to kind of have this extreme reading of the Constitution.
All right, thank you, John. And John's website, it's a blog as well, very, very incredible reading, is linked up at Twitter, at our Twitter feed at coasttocoastam.com. Facing unsustainable budget deficits, the United States will have to make difficult choices between higher taxes and social spending, according to the Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke. So he says trimming the deficit was made more urgent by the rapidly aging U.S. population, and he says inevitably addressing fiscal challenges posed by an aging population will require willingness to make some difficult choices. So get ready for that. Two women were arrested on a British airport at the airport on suspicion of trying to smuggle a dead relative onto a flight bound for Germany. The 91-year-old deceased man was pushed into a wheelchair through Liverpool's John Lennon Airport wearing sunglasses, almost like Weekend at Bernie's, before check-in staff became suspicious and he was prevented from boarding the plane. He was believed to have been driven about 35 miles to the airport by taxi. The women were arrested on suspicion of failing to give notification of a death. They were released on bail. A study suggests that people who report having near-death experiences, such as seeing lights or divine encounters, have increased levels of carbon dioxide in the blood. According to research, between 11 and 23% of heart attack survivors report having near-death experiences. The study, which is reported in the journal Critical Care, looked at 52 heart attack victims. 11 had a near-death experience, and the common link was a high level of carbon dioxide in the blood. Researchers said more work still needs to be done to confirm the findings, but understanding a near-death experience is very important. Up next, Dr. Jeffrey Long with us will react to this story next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie. This hour, Dr. Jeffrey Long with us, MD, leading near-death experience researcher, and he is the founder of the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation as well. More than 10 years of research gone into Dr. Long's study of more than 1,300 near-death experiences, and here he is to react to the story. Jeffrey, welcome back, first of all. How are you?
I'm doing great. Pleasure to be back, George.
Now, this study about high levels of CO2 in near-death experiencers doesn't negate the fact that there's an afterlife. They didn't go that far and say that, did they?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, the study was very tentative. As you mentioned, George, I've studied over 1,300 near-death experiences. This study involved 11 near-death experiences.
That's it?
Yep, that's totally the sum total of the study here.
Now, what does this tell you about what they were studying in the first place? I mean, the fact that there are high levels of CO2, maybe that's normal when somebody's getting close to death, huh?
Oh, absolutely. Let me talk about terms a little bit here. We're using the term CO2. That's carbon dioxide. That's a normal gas in blood, in everybody's blood. Now, when you stop breathing, when you're not exhaling carbon dioxide, which is a normal physiologic function, then carbon dioxide can build up in the blood, and you have higher levels of that particular type of gas in the blood. The study that was published today from the University of Maribor from Slovenia suggests that higher levels of carbon dioxide might be associated with near-death experience. I'm not convinced, and we'll be glad to talk about that.
Absolutely. Let's also get your views, too. You know, you have been studying near-death experience for now well over 10 years, Jeffrey. How did you get into this? What pushed you into this field?
Well, I actually first heard about near-death experience in one of the world's most prestigious journals, the Journal of the American Medical Association. I was looking for a cancer-related article and saw an article that talked about near-death experience. I was fascinated. In all my medical training, I knew that you couldn't possibly have a lucid, organized experience while unconscious or clinically dead, and yet this article talked about exactly that phenomenon. I was hooked right when I read that. And from following that, I then proceeded to study near-death experience, and I've been doing that, as you said, for over a decade.
All right, let's talk, if you can, about some other studies that might have gone on over the years. Wasn't there a study, or there was a doctor who said that at the moment of death, the body appears to lose weight as if the soul has weight?
Yeah, you know, in the early 1900s, there was a leading researcher that suggested that perhaps the body lost a few grams of weight at the time of death, and gosh, could that possibly represent the weight of the soul? Well, actually, subsequent research following that time, including some good methodology where they carefully weighed the body when the person was close to death and then immediately following death, really did not find a drop in weight. So as best we can tell, some of the earlier studies probably represented some evaporation from the body, some loss of water. But as best we can tell, there doesn't seem to be any part of the body, that being soul or anything else, that we can weigh with any kind of instruments we have available to us today.
In your opinion, and not the physical moment of death, but in your opinion, in the metaphysical or the spiritual part of dying, what happens to someone when they're getting close to having that body stop functioning?